Okay, folks, we're going to have a little chat for a few minutes about Sinn Féin's housing policy, a house of our own. And the idea is that people would have a home anywhere in the country. For rural Ireland and urban Ireland, as you know, housing is probably the biggest crisis and the biggest difficulty we have across the length and breadth of the country. No matter where we go or who we speak to, whether it's people in urban areas or in rural areas, whether it's people who are professionals, whether it's people on high incomes or people on low incomes, the same problem arises, that they cannot find a place where they can live sustainably into the future, a place to rent or a place to buy, or to be able to build their house in rural areas as well. So Eoin O'Brien here is our housing spokesperson, and Eoin launched a document in the last couple of weeks called A Home of Your Own, which is about coming up with a programme for people so that we can understand how this seemingly, far as the government is concerned, impossible situation can be resolved. And we certainly feel that that can be resolved. And one of the key solutions to that is about having a third type of housing, which is an affordable housing sector. We already have the social housing sector in Ireland, the council housing. We have the market, where people go onto the market and try and buy a house from the local real estate agent or wherever, often can't afford to do it. But the other, which we're talking about, is a third way, where people who are on an income which is above the social housing income, but not enough to be able to go into the market and try and buy a house, that those people would actually have a third way of doing that, which would be sustainable, which would create an affordable house, which would be affordable into perpetuity, affordable forever, for the next generation and the generation after, and that the state would have a firm hand in that policy. So I'll ask Eoin maybe to say a few more words about it, and then I'll fire some of the awkward questions at him and see how he does.
Thanks very much, Martin, and look, it's really brilliant to be here. I spend a lot of time travelling around the country, not just meeting with members of the public, but meeting with builders, meeting architects, meeting local authority, housing managers, people who are involved in the business of building homes every single day, and that includes people building their own homes. And one of the things that strikes you when you do that tour is, despite the fact that all of the media coverage about the housing crisis talks about Dublin and talks about the commuter belt, it really doesn't matter what county you're in. It doesn't matter if you're in a town, if you're in a village, or if you're in a more rural countryside area. People are increasingly unable to put an affordable roof over their heads. It's probably the biggest issue affecting us. In fact, I was looking at the Irish Examiner. They have an opinion poll this morning asking people in rural Ireland, obviously with the eye to the ploughing, what are their three biggest issues of concern? And housing is in the top three, and of course it is, because whether you want to build your home, whether you want to buy your home, whether you want to rent your home while you're waiting to build or buy, it's just becoming increasingly difficult. So at the core of the plan that we've launched, and the plan that we've launched is very comprehensive. It's the first time an opposition party has kind of set out in really, really clear detail, not only what we want to do, but how we would do it. At the core of that plan, I suppose, is two key things. The first is we want to significantly increase investment to our local authorities, to approved housing bodies, to community housing cooperatives, to be able to build really, really large volumes of social, affordable rental and affordable purchase homes. And when we say affordable, we mean at prices that people can afford. I mean people who are earning 50,000, 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 euros before tax, singles or couples, that they can buy and rent at genuinely affordable prices. But the other thing we want to do, and this is particularly important for rural areas, is we want to support the small and medium-sized building contractors and those building companies involved in new building technologies to be able to deliver far, far more homes onto the private market for people to buy at more affordable prices. And there's a whole range of policies, both in terms of public housing and in terms of private housing through the SME and new building technology sector, that we think, if they're introduced, will get more homes on the ground. In terms of the affordable housing, it's a very straightforward proposition. What we want to do is to say, okay, a local authority here or an approved housing body there, they're going to build a housing estate. It could be 20 or 30 units in a rural area, it could be a larger housing estate in the cities and towns. And a portion of those homes are going to be for people to buy, working people on 50 up to 90,000 euros. The person will buy the house at the cost of construction. They'll pay for the house. The house will be legally theirs. They can do what they want with it, subject to planning permission, and they have the absolute right to pass that home to the children and the grandchildren. What the state will pay for is the land, the site servicing, the utility connections, and waive development levies. And because the state covers those costs, that allows the purchaser to buy the home at a price of 240, 250, 260, to 70,000 euros. And the only condition, I suppose, is that when they come to sell the home, if they want to sell it, they sell it to another affordable purchaser at the future affordable purchase price. Price they paid for it, index linked for inflation, home improvement. So if they've extended the home, that'll be factored into the purchase price. If they put more solar on the home, that'll be factored into the purchase price. So it's about giving people access to those genuinely affordable homes. And then on the SME, the small building contractor side and the new building technology sector, when I talk to building contractors, what are they telling me they need? They need access to land. They need far quicker planning permission, and they need lower cost finance. And if they have access to those three things, they can get on site, build more good quality homes to sell on the open market at more moderated prices. And then the last bit of the picture is all across the country, and again, in County Roscommon, in Meath, in Waterford, we've really good, and in Laois and elsewhere, we've really good companies who have developed cutting edge building technologies, 2D and 3D building systems, timber, light gauge steel, etc. They want to be able to build more homes for people to buy. The problem is they can't get in on public works contracts, they can't build up their pipeline. So again, the policy is about supporting Irish businesses, Irish jobs, Irish builders, Irish home manufacturers to be able to deliver far more good quality homes that people afford. So more public homes delivered by local government and approved housing bodies, more private homes to buy delivered by the SME and new building technology sector. And as we do that in urban, rural and countryside areas, there's more homes for people to buy to have that home of your own. I always say to people, it's not rocket science. There was a time we used to do this, and we used to do this much, much more easily, where working people were able to access a home of their own. Last 20 or 30 years, it's become far, far too difficult. Our housing plan is about reversing that and making sure people are able to put an affordable roof over their heads.
Thank you very much, Eoin. I suppose there's a couple of questions that keep coming up in the media, and people keep asking this, and it's mainly focused around that sector of the affordable home. And one of them is that, and this is what the government's accusation is, that you never really own the house, or you never really own the home, because the state still owns the land under it. How do you deal with that? How do people feel secure in that context, that they actually have ownership of the house and the home that they live in?
So when I talk to people all around the country, and I've been a housing spokesperson since 2016, people tell me they want three things. The first is they want to be able to buy the house at an affordable price. They want to be able to buy the home at a price that they can actually access. The second thing is they want control of it. They want to be able to do to that home what anybody does. Extend it, decorate it, improve it. They want to be able to control it. They also want to be able to ensure that when they hit pension age, the mortgage is paid down and their income covers quality of life. And then finally, they want to be able to give it to their kids. So for me, they're the things people say they want. And right now, if you're a household on 50, 60, 70 grand, it is virtually impossible to get those four things. So the first thing is, in our scheme, you get all four of those. The home is legally yours, it's sold at an affordable price with an affordable mortgage. You're able to do whatever you want to that home and the land around it, as you would do in a private market home, and you can pass it on to your kids. And how we do that is simply separating the house from the land. It's a very simple proposition. The land is then free for you to use in perpetuity. No hidden ground rents, no hidden shared equity charges, nothing hidden there. But all we're saying is, if you're able to buy this home at a genuinely affordable price, then when you come to sell it, all we're asking is for you to sell that home at a fair, affordable price to the next buyer. You don't lose anything, but nor, I suppose, do you make a windfall. Compare that to the government's affordable housing scheme. So when I look at Darragh O'Brien's scheme in Dublin, the full price of an affordable home under this government scheme is 450 to 500,000 euros. That compares to our scheme of an average price of about 250,000 euros. The second thing is, under the government scheme, they own 20% of the home. They take an equity share in the house and they own 20% of it. So that means you spend 30 years, you and your partner, working damn hard to pay down that mortgage, and you still have to pay back the state 20%. And of course, 20% in 30 years' time is going to be more than the cash value. But also under the government scheme, if you want to pay down that equity, you can only pay it down in 10 grand lump sums, or if you don't pay it down at all, your kids have to pay it on transfer. So on almost every comparison, the scheme we're proposing is much fairer, it's much more affordable, and actually you have control over the home, unlike the governments. Now, sure, for some people, this land thing is going to be a bit of a cultural change. People are going to kind of want to know, what are the terms and conditions? For me, that's the really crucial thing. The terms and conditions are the house is legally yours to do with what you want. But the condition is you bought it at an affordable price, you sell it at an affordable price. And by doing that, year on year, we'll build up this stock of privately owned, privately traded, permanently affordable homes. People will then trade up and down within that market. People will trade out of that market into the private market and back down again. So in some senses, the private market will continue to exist here. Increasingly, working people on average incomes and above average incomes will be able to afford the affordable homes. Folks whose incomes are very low will continue to have social housing and will be catering for all sections of society. Likewise, on the private market, if we're supporting small building contractors and SME builder developers to build more homes, if we're giving them lower cost finance, if we're giving them quicker planning decisions through resourcing the local authorities on board Panola, if we're ensuring that they get access to land and land more quickly, their all-in development costs come down and their sale prices come down. So it's not just better quality and better priced homes on the public side, it's also good quality, more moderated price homes on the private side. And the more I talk to people, people have lots of good questions, they want to really understand it. But when they understand the terms and conditions, and crucially, you can buy that home at a price of brand new home, A1 energy rated, anywhere in the country at an average price of $250. People begin to see the benefit of the scheme for them, their children and subsequent generations. And certainly we've got a very positive reception since launching it.
Yeah, I suppose one of the things that struck me about it was that it's very similar to buying an apartment. If you buy an apartment block, obviously you don't buy the ground under it or the apartment under it or over it. You only buy that part of the unit, and this housing is similar. Except it has that condition to it that people will if they're selling it, also have to sell it at an affordable price to a person on the affordable price list, which means that it keeps it affordable forever, rather than in the past, and we've come across them, I suppose, all over the country, where people would often have been in a local authority or council house, they'd buy out that house at a low price, usually because they'd paid rent over many years, and then if times got better for them, or perhaps at the end of their life, they'd sell it, or their family would sell it at a very high price and make it. That can never happen. So it'll never move out of being in the affordable sector. One of the other questions that people often ask is, where will we get all the builders? Where will we get all the action to make this happen? Because that's one of the things that we're told, that there's a critical shortage in regard to labour and skilled labour to build houses or to make that provision across the whole state.
So this is a really important question, but it's important that we understand what we have and what we can do, what we have currently. There's about 177,000 people working in construction, according to the CSO. Last time we had that number of construction sector workers, we were building about 20,000 more homes than we're currently building. Yes, the standards were lower. Yes, the quality of some of those homes in 2004 was very questionable. But what that tells us is that right now, if we fixed a number of other issues, we could actually be building more homes with the workers that we have. That doesn't mean we don't need to grow the sector, we do, and I'll come back to that in a second. So the first thing is when I talk to builders, from the large PLCs like Glenveagh and Cairn, to the small building contractor in County Carlow or County Sligo who's doing 50, 60, 70 units a year to sell on the market, what they're actually telling me is their most immediate problem isn't labour. Their most immediate problem is it's taken far too long to get through on board Planola if there's an appeal, because on board Planola doesn't have enough staff. It's taking far too long to get a pre-planning application or to get further information processed through the council because they don't have enough staff. They're telling me the cost of finance is too high. If you're an SME builder in those counties, cost of finance is 10, 12, 14%, right? If you can get it. And what they're also telling us then is that sometimes getting access to the land and adequately serviced land is the challenge. So first of all, with the workers we have, if we get access to low-cost finance, how do we do that? Home Building Finance Ireland is the state's lender. It should have a specific product for SME builders, lending at sub 10%, 7%, 6% construction finance. Likewise, how do we get the planning stuff sorted? An extra 500 staff into our local authorities, an extra 50 staff into on board Planola, and strict statutory timelines for pre-planning, further information, appeal. and an extra 3 judges into the High Court for good measure, and statutory timelines on JRs for residential development. So everybody knows exactly how long it takes to get the permissions through. And it also means relooking at the county development plans in light of much more ambitious housing targets to make sure we have adequate volume of zoned land. But also the people who have the zoned land are going to use it. If Martin isn't a builder, but he has a bit of land and he's just sitting on it there waiting for it to go up in value, Martin shouldn't have that zoned land. If somebody else wants to build on it, we have to find a way of getting the land that's zoned to the folks who want to residentially develop it, and we've lots of proposals around that. So, first bit of it is we can do more with what we have by fixing those problems. Second thing is we have too many construction workers building the wrong things. We don't need more data centres, apart hotels and high-end build-to-rent apartments for €2,000 to €3,000 a month in Dublin and the commuter belt. We need the builders that we have to be building good quality homes for working people, social homes, affordable homes and private for purchase homes. And that's about changing tax and planning rules to ensure that the builders we have are building the stuff that we need. Whenever I talk to school principals in Dublin and the commuter belt, they're telling us they can't get teachers for love nor money because they can't afford to rent or buy. If we talk to people working in hospitality, they're telling us they can't get workers to work in hotels and in retail and hospitality because of the cost. And this isn't just a Dublin phenomenon. Go to the big tourist parts of the west of Ireland, go to those big tourism intensive towns and smaller cities, and the inability of people to get affordable homes is really hurting industry as well. So that means diverting some of the workers we have across to more residential. And the third thing is, how do we build the industry? How do we get more people, particularly young people, into construction, and how do we keep them there? We have to pay them properly. That means we have to tackle bogus subcontracting. We have to ensure that building contractors can get multi-annual frameworks of work so they're guaranteed the workload for their construction workers. We have to keep construction workers working close to where they live. Like, it's not attractive to a young person today to say you're going to be working 3 months in Dublin, 3 months in Donegal, 3 months in Cork and 3 different developments, and you're going to be outdoors all the time in the elements. We have to make it much more attractive. And then for me, the new building technology sector is key. Some people talk about modern methods of construction, some people talk about volumetric. I use this phrase, new building technologies. And this is where really, really high quality 60, 90, 100-year homes are manufactured in factories of really good quality building materials. Much of those materials are manufactured here as well, timber and light gauge steel. And we've really great companies emerging with these technologies. The problem is it's really hard for them to get those pipelines of work. And the reason why this is important for labour is because it's factory work. It's good quality, well-paid factory work where people work close to where they live, where people work indoors in decent working conditions, and also where we can manage the quality of the building property as well. So, fix the other problems to get more with what we have, redirect a section of the workforce that are currently building things we don't need into what we do need, then tackle those issues around improving the quality of construction and tackling the low pay, particularly in apprenticeships, to grow the sector. Because ultimately we need to get to about 70,000 new build homes by 2029. We can't do that with 177,000 construction sector workers. We need to get up to and past 200,000. So it's a kind of a phased approach over 4 phases. And the good news is, for those that are particularly interested in this area, government set up an independent housing commission with people who are involved in the business of building homes day and daily. They published a really, really valuable report in June or July of this year. They have lots to say about how we build the building construction industry and the allied professionals. And these aren't policy people, these are politicians, these are people who are involved in delivering homes every day of the week. They've given us lots of good suggestions as how to build the construction sector. But don't let anybody tell you we can't do more with what we have now if we use it more intelligently. And therefore it's about a pathway to growing the sector, but increasing the volume of good quality new homes for people to buy on a year-on-year basis out to 2029 and beyond.
Yes, so I suppose one of the other things I was thinking about there that certainly I come across in a lot of rural towns is that the infrastructure isn't in place. There's many places where if a developer did buy a site and want to build 40, 50 houses in a regional town somewhere, they'd find that either the wastewater infrastructure isn't up to scratch or the water infrastructure isn't up to scratch and they're not able to do it, and their planning permission will be delayed or postponed because of that. Do we need to see a round of investment in those infrastructure services, particularly water and wastewater?
and this is really critical, because you can have all the building workers that you want. You can have all the money to invest in the building of homes that you want. But if you don't have that underlying critical infrastructure, you come up against all of these roadblocks. And again, this is one of the big issues that not just private developers talk to us about.
Yeah, just leave it out.
I'll raise it and talk into it.
Okay.
That's much better, isn't it? He's my boss and he's always pushing me around. This is Mick, everybody. So we need to have that critical infrastructure. So there's a couple of things, again, that we need to do. The first is, we have these city and county development plans, but those city and county development plans aren't necessarily aligned in terms of your critical infrastructure for wastewater and drinking water, your road and your public transport, and your public and private residential development. So we have to ensure that not only our development plans are more integrated, but then the delivery of those development plans is much, much more coordinated, and I'll talk about how we do that in a second. The second thing is, when we're designing those development plans, they have to be much clearer. If there's extra capacity in wastewater and water treatment here, then that's where the investment in the residential development has to go. And while we're building out there, then the secondary level of investment in wastewater infrastructure and drinking water goes here, and then the building developers can move over. Far too often our development plans are blind. They give people zoning and they give people planning, but they're kind of blind to, okay, but what's the capacity in the particular areas and how do we develop it? The third then is funding, particularly Uisce Éireann. Uisce Éireann needs about €1 billion more over the next 5 years just to deliver the wastewater and drinking water treatment capacity that we need to meet the current government's targets, let alone the more ambitious targets we have. There's no indication currently from government they'll get that money. We'll be launching our alternative budget in a week or two, and we're making a very clear commitment to provide that €1 billion extra plus some. It gives them the capacity to invest. But then the really crucial thing is, how do you ensure that Uisce Éireann here, the National Transport Authority here, your local authorities building programme here, your private residential development builders with all their land and zoning and finance there, how do you properly coordinate all of those? And again, the Housing Commission has given us a really, really neat proposition in terms of how to address this. And this is coming from people who build homes every single day. So they're telling us this is the solution. We need to listen to it. The first is, what they're saying is, as an emergency measure, we need a housing delivery oversight executive, not a new layer of bureaucracy, not another layer of public servants, but the key decision makers in those public and private bodies who are spending that capital investment to be within a structure statewide and then in every local authority to align their capital investment programs and tackle problems in real time and have the legal power to overcome those problems as quickly as possible. Here's a good example. Let's imagine there's 3 private residential developers anywhere in this county, and they've 3 plots of land. And they've all got planning permission, they've all got development finance, they're ready to go, they're going to build a really good quality product at a price that people in the local market can afford, with some social and affordable in there as well. The problem is, they need an upgrade of a wastewater treatment plant here. The problem is, under the current rules of the Commission for Energy Regulation, Irish Water can't go in and upgrade that wastewater treatment plant to benefit all 3 developments, right? They can only spend the amount of money necessary for the first development. It's completely crazy. It makes no sense whatsoever. Thankfully, there's a neat solution. There's a really great company set up by Cork County Council, funded through ISIF, called the Housing Infrastructure Services Company. Really, really nice solution to infrastructural challenges. Hisco could come in, build a wastewater treatment plant. 3 builders would then have their sites unlocked. They can build their housing developments in train. And then as they sell those units, they pay Hisco at the end, rather than asking Irish Water or the 3 builder developers to build it now. Same cost, same price, but it's at the end of the development model. How do we know this is going to work? Because it's already happening. Hisco is out there. The problem is, it needs more support, it needs more funding, it needs to be mainstreamed. So there are lots of really practical solutions to these kinds of problems, if there was the wherewithal in government. And again, I talk to builders and developers, as well as approved housing bodies and local government managers. When you put them in the room, they can find the solutions to a lot of these problems because they're practically minded people. So some of this is actually about taking the civil service, no harm to them, they do a good job, but they're not residential developers. They're people involved in policy and management of finance. Taking them out of the micromanagement, taking them out of the day-to-day delivery, and making it as easy as possible for people involved in residential development to build good quality homes on the public and private sector side at prices that people can actually afford. So there are real solutions to those problems. Some of it requires more money, some of it requires better coordination, and some of it requires devolving the decision making down to the level of the people on the ground involved in project management, because they're going to know what the solutions are going to be. And then our job, if we're in government with the civil service, is to be that oversight, to make sure nobody loses the run of themselves. We don't want €300,000 bike shelters all over the country. We want really good quality, affordable homes. But that can be done. There's a much better way of doing it, and our housing plan sets out how we think that's possible.
Yeah, I'm just thinking here, Eoin, as well. We're in obviously rural Ireland, and I was earlier on in the Farmers Journal tent, and one of the questions we were asked about was a residential zoned land tax, and where active farmers sometimes in towns has land zoned, and it's a small minority, but at the same time it's representative of a situation where government is not treating them right and isn't doing something for them. Now, it's clearly our policy, and Pierce Doherty from the very outset tried to put down amendments to prevent that from happening. But in regard to rural areas and people living in the countryside who need to live in the countryside or who wish to live in the countryside, I myself come from a parish in rural County Leitrim, Mahavass, where we have got population decline, and in a lot of areas we have decline. Our school was a 3-teacher school when my kids were going to school. The youngest is now 20, and it's down to a 2-teacher school, and probably in the next couple of years it'll close because there's no new families coming living in that particular parish, and there's no town in the parish. The next parish to it is the same, and the next parish to it is the same. There's no town, it's just rural countryside. And we have got heavy enough soil and problems with percolation areas and all of that when it comes to building. And at the same time, there's solutions there. But we think we need to have a solution for areas where we have got depopulation, where we have got a crisis of that nature. In many parts of the country, when you go into rural Ireland, you'll find, and the CSO figures are there, that we have less than 30 people per square kilometre. And it's internationally recognised that where you have less than 30 people per square kilometre, you're in terminal decline. It's not possible to arrest it back. And a lot of people that come and live in the cities and towns, you know, what they want to do is they want to go back and build a house or have a house back in their own community. They want to send their children to the same school as they went to. They want their children to play football for the same football club that they played for. And they find that they've been denied that or inhibited from doing that. And just in regard to what our position in Sinn Féin would be in respect of that and how we would overcome those difficulties.
Sure, and just quickly on the residential zone land tax, because this is one of these ones I just don't understand at all. So if somebody has land, and if they're actively farming that land, then that land should be zoned agricultural land. That's what it's been used for. And this idea that the Director of Planning can zone that land something else when the owner of that land wants it to be agricultural land, for me it's one of the worst ways of thinking about planning. So we've made it very clear, first of all, with the residential zoned land tax, anybody who's actively farming the land should not be subject to the tax, and the zoning should follow the use of the land, which is agricultural land. And if at a later stage that landowner wants to get that land rezoned and do something with it commercially, that's fine. But this idea that somebody is a farmer and farms their land and some official elsewhere decides that no, we want that land used for a different purpose, when everybody knows it's not going to be used for that purpose, it's just, it's one of those things I've just never fully understood. So the exemption should be in straight away, and the zoning should follow accordingly. On the issue of housing and community development in rural countryside areas. So first of all, we know from looking at the census where population is stagnating and where population is declining. And there's 3 areas where that's happening. First of all, it's happening in the centre of Dublin and the centre of Cork, and we've a set of population proposals around there. But you can draw 2 lines, the west of the Midlands and the western seaboard, right? And that includes where Martin lives, where census after census shows us the population decline. And it's not because people don't want to live in those communities. In fact, as Martin says, many people do. Some of it's about economic development and job growth, and our spokespeople on that have lots to say. But it's also about ensuring that people have the opportunity to have good quality, affordable homes in those communities. And there's a couple of challenges. So the first is, there were some very significant legal changes in Europe a number of years ago that have changed what's possible and not possible legally within our planning system. The government of the day was tasked with developing new rural planning guidelines. They have finished those rural planning guidelines, and they have been sat on the desk of 3 consecutive ministers of state, and they haven't published them. And it's just crackers, because what that means is, in the absence of clear guidelines from central government, different local authorities and different individual planners are approaching this in completely different ways. And that's deeply unfair, people need to know what the rules of the game are. People need to know, if they own land, do they have a reasonable chance, subject to all of the appropriate conditions, of securing planning time, and then settle on them. My understanding is they have been ready as far back as 2017 or 2018, and it's kind of irresponsible for them still to be sat there. So that's issue one. Issue two then is that not everybody can build on their own land, right? We know that. We know in urban and rural areas we don't just have an automatic right to build. But we need to ensure in those areas where there's population decline and population stagnation that either A, we make it easier for people to build on their own land, or B, we give them alternatives so people can live in those rural communities. And there's a whole series of mechanisms by which government through our local authorities can support rural communities in either A, helping people to cluster together in sustainable settlements in nice small rural hamlets around families or around existing communities, or B, where the privately owned land doesn't facilitate that, ensuring through the provision of public land people have that same opportunity. The objective should be to have in every city or in every county development plan and in every area where you have rural population decline and stagnation, and this is particularly the case in our islands and particularly in case of our rural Gaeltacht communities, is that there's a plan to show year on year where we're going to have the new houses. Are they going to be renovated existing dwellings and structures? Are they going to be new build houses? How are we going to get the services into them in a way that's economically sustainable? How are we going to cluster the population together in a way that's going to be socially sustainable into the future, particularly as we all get older and have to deal with the challenges of age? And how they're environmentally sustainable. So there are absolutely solutions to this. Tipperary County Council has been doing some really interesting pilots about facilitating rural communities clustering and putting in supports to facilitate that. So it's a mixture of clarifying the rules, helping people where it's appropriate to build on their own land, and where it's not, ensuring that land is provided to have economically, socially and environmentally sustainable communities that are in the interest of those communities themselves. They do this much better in other countries. We used to do it much better in our own past. So I'm absolutely of the view, not that we go back to the bad old days of Fianna Fáil, whatever you're having yourself, build as much suburban sprawl or as much ribbon one-off development. Those days are gone. But we can have good quality sustainable communities in our urban cores, in our towns, in our villages and in countryside areas. And then the last thing I just want to talk about is vacancy, right? Because again, depending on what part of the country you're from, you'll see in your villages, in your towns and in some of your countryside areas, phenomenal levels of vacancy, criminal levels of vacancy. The problem is if you wanted to buy one of those units, if you wanted to get planning, if you wanted to bring it back into use, it's far, far too complex. It's far too cumbersome. Even the government's own vacant and derelict property refurbishment grant, you have to have the money up front in your own pocket to pay for the refurb works because they only give you the grant at the end. What's the point in giving people a grant if they have to have the money up front? So we have to get much more serious about supporting people, both our local authorities and private individuals, bringing those vacant and derelict units back into use. Really, really great way not only to revive our towns and villages, but also some of those countryside areas. And again, if you have a look at our housing plan on the website, whether it's planning, whether it's vacancy and dereliction, whether it's supporting rural urban communities, we've really detailed plans there as to how to do this stuff better, to ultimately ensure people, to the maximum extent possible, have the choice to live in the communities they want to live in, to be part of those communities in ways that's good for them into the future.
Thank you very much, Eoin. I think we've covered pretty much everything. I don't know, is there anyone has any questions? If anyone has a short question or two for the floor, and if not, I don't see anyone jumping out of their skin. One man here, yes?
Yeah, so, all right, the current government timeline. So I hope I'm getting the government. So what do you think is your timeline to make this happen?
The timeline in respect of delivery.
And just the second one then, like, you know, we've a lot of communities around the West of Ireland where we're from, and there, you know, there's a lot of rural houses. What about railway infrastructure? How do we make that? Because the technology is there, we're working on it globally. And why does that have to happen?
So for folks that didn't hear, the first question is, if we're in government, what's the timeline for delivery? And the second is obviously railway and public transport and transport infrastructure more generally. So again, to go back to the Housing Commission report, and the reason why I go back to this report is because, again, if you ask a bunch of people who are involved in the delivery of homes every day to come up with sensible solutions as to how to increase and accelerate those, you need to pay very close attention to their timelines. And inside the Housing Commission's report, they're saying the following. Last year, about 30,000 new build homes were delivered. We estimate it's probably going to be about the same this year, despite what some government ministers are telling you. They're saying it's both necessary and possible to move in 2025 to above 40,000, 50,000 the year after, shy of 60 in the third year, and hitting 70,000 in years 4 and 5. So they're saying that is what is required, first of all, to meet unmet and emerging demand, but also they say it's possible if you make a series of changes. We've accepted that. We're saying if that's what the experts are telling us, then it's up to the political system to respond. And simple things. So for example, we know that there's over 22,000 social homes in the pipeline, but it takes 18 to 24 months to get them on site. If we cut all of that bureaucracy down to about 6 months, and we've set out how we can do that, you can get those projects on site much more quickly and built more quickly. Likewise, we can see these huge delays in getting planning permissions, particularly appeals through the board. Sometimes it can take a year, in extreme cases 2 years to get an appeal. We know what's required. The board has told us the additional staff. There'll be some recruitment challenges, but we've been in meeting with the Irish Planning Institute about that, so that you can get those timelines down and then stick to them so people are getting those planning permissions much more quickly. So I suppose the straight answer is the Housing Commission has set the challenge. They've told us what the delivery timelines need to be. They've told us what the policy changes. We don't agree with all of their detailed policy prescriptions. We think there are areas where we have, not from us necessarily, but from other sources, better ways to fix those problems. But either way, they're your kind of notional timelines. And if you take new building technologies, so right now, from the companies that are out there, a few hundred units is what they can deliver. We've sat down with the building technology companies and we've asked them over a 5-year timeline, if you have multi-annual framework agreements, if there's some upfront funding for you to be able to pump prime your operations at the factory level, what can you do year on year? And again, the time we've set out very ambitious targets for the growth of that sector among others. So that'll give you a sense of all of that. And then in terms of public transport, so I'm not going to give the game away because the folks who are doing the alternative budget, they have a bunch of things they want to announce and I don't want to steal their thunder. But there are two things. First of all, has anybody old enough to remember, we used to have an All-Ireland rail network. It was a rail network that went to every county and to every town and beyond every town in the country. The technology infrastructure is there. We have significant budget surpluses. Everybody knows the Apple tax revenue decision was announced. Now is the opportunity to invest in that critical infrastructure, whether it's underlying water and wastewater, whether it's transport and public transport infrastructure, whether it's affordable housing. These aren't just expenditure items. This is investment, not just in the well-being of people, families and communities. This is investment in the economic and social development of the state. So you'll see some very big announcements in terms of transport, public transport and rail in the alternative budget. I don't want to be given out to by our transport spokesperson after this for giving the game away, but that's the future. Likewise, if you take Dublin and the Dublin, what people patronisingly call the Greater Dublin area, but the counties surrounding, we need a much more integrated bus and rail transport system to ensure that people are actually able to move in and out of the places where they work, whether they're on this side of the M50 or the other side of the M50. One of the great things about bus transport is where rail has a long lead-in time because of the capital investment and the amount of time it takes to build a stock. Investment in buses is something that can happen much more quickly. It's not an either or, but you need both, and the plan will set out all of those. But I have to make this point. My father was born in a Dublin corporation built house in the 1930s. And for people who are students of history, in the 1930s, this country was broke. Folks, this country hadn't got a bean. We'd just been through a war of independence and a civil war. We were about to go through the impact of the Second World War, with all of the disruptions, supply chain, pressures on labour force, pressures on building materials. And a government made a simple decision, that it wasn't acceptable for people to live in tenements. And they went in and they knocked the tenements and they built good quality homes for working people, for regular working people across a whole range of professions and incomes. How do I know? Because that's how my family got their start out of the tenements in the inner city of Dublin and into first the flats, then the houses in Crumlin, and then when they went after them. If we were able to do that in the 1930s and 40s, transform the lives of working people by doing something very, very basic, giving them the opportunity as working people to put an affordable roof over their heads, then why can't we do it today when the country has more experience, more talent, more skill and more money than ever before. So this isn't a question of, is this possible? This is a question of, why hasn't it been done now? And do we have a government that has the political will to make the changes? Will we make some mistakes? Sure we will. Will we get everything right? Of course we won't. Is our plan pitch perfect? Are there areas for improvement? Of course there are. But in 2024, the idea that we have for the first time in the history of this state, young people with education, with good jobs, who are being forced to emigrate because they cannot put an affordable roof over their heads, is a scandal that we should all be saying is not acceptable. And therefore what we've tried to do in our plan is set out, in as much as we can, having listened to and engaged with all of the different sectors out there involved in the delivery of housing and underlying infrastructure, how do we make that radical reset in housing policy that the Housing Commission has asked for? I think it's possible, I think it's doable, but that's only going to happen if we have a change of government, a change of housing plan, and not unlike the 30s and 40s, people said, it is possible, let's go and do it now.
Thank you very much, Eoin. I think we'll wind up at that. Anyone who has a keen interest in this subject, I'd advise you to go onto the Sinn Féin website, A Home of Your Own, and you can get the full details there. The full document is published there.